What is good, everyone? For this video, I'm sharing different tips on timing in photography because timing can make or break a photo. It really can be everything. And I'm going to get into all about that and share some of my tips on how to strengthen your photos through good timing. But before we get into that, this is a part of a photosynthesis series here where I kind of a catch-all where I can take any questions, topics, ideas, questions from you, and I take them and I turn them into a video. And this is actually coming from that, from you. I mentioned timing a lot because it really can take a photo to the next level and be the whole reason it really works. And there's different things you can do when it comes to timing. It's not just one set thing that you time for. There's many different things you can look for and time for, and that's what we're going to talk about in this photosynthesis tips on timing in photography. So let's get into it. I'm going to share around 7 tips. The first 5 are going to be things that you can look for and time for, and the last 2 are a little more complicated on how you can time for the whole scene. But let's start off with gesture. Gesture is an obvious one because that can really make a photo. When you're out there, you want to be looking for gesture, but you also need to take the photo at the right time to get that gesture kind of at its peak where it really can show in a photo. You could have someone, obvious examples, someone pointing. Now, if they're starting to point, that's not going to really show as much as if they're fully pointing. That's an obvious one, but any type of gesture, just how someone has their hands, and maybe they have them on their head, or maybe they're, arms crossed, or they're kind of mid-movement gesture. There's all types of gestures, as you know, but you have to time for them when it really shows that gesture. You can also look for gestures kind of mid-movement where it's a little bit odd and there's something unique about it. Maybe it's a little off balance. Things like this can be a good thing too. So you'll see some people's photos, or maybe just even a specific photo, and you'll be like, there's just something about it that's unique, and it'll be part of the gesture there because they timed it for an odd movement, an odd gesture like that. And another thing you can look for when it comes to kind of related to gesture, but look for people in action. So you could have someone moving, you could have someone throwing a ball, but you want to time it so it's at that peak moment where it really shows that movement and that action. When they're running, if they have their hands like this and their legs are straight, right mid-movement, they're not going to look like they're running. But if they're in full stride, maybe even both feet are off the ground, I try to time for that if someone's running. That really shows the action, and it takes a photo where maybe the viewer won't even know what they're doing and makes it really obvious what they're doing. So really a lot of the time when you're timing for gesture or action is you want to time and click that shutter right when they're at their full gesture or their full action where it really can show in a photo, because you're there and you see everything that's happening, but the viewer of that photo wasn't there. They don't know what's happening, so it really has to show in that photo for them to really get the feel of what's happening. And you can time for the gesture and action in different ways too. You can time so it's obvious what's happening, so it kind of tells what's happening, or you can time for it in a way that is a little bit mysterious or odd, kind of like I was just talking about when you catch a mid-movement where it just feels a little bit off and unique because you're seeing someone frozen in mid-movement like that. So there's different things you can time for, but you should be timing for what you want to show in that photo. And another thing to time for related to gesture is expression or emotion. So if you're more focused on a person's face, you can still time for certain things, especially if you have a good character. If you have a good character and you just have their face like this, even if they're interesting, it's going to be pretty hard to make an interesting photo just out of a normal expression. So you want to time for specific expressions, or if they have a frown, a scowl, a laugh, a genuine laugh. All types of expressions you can imagine, but you want to time for that expression because that's going to add even more character to the character. So if you photograph some people laughing, you want to catch them mid-laugh where it's at the most genuine moment. You want to time for the natural expression, or when someone's angry, you want to time for that full-on scowl, or if someone is, kind of daydreaming or contemplating something, you want to catch them maybe when their eyebrows are raised a little bit. You want to catch that expression that can really show what they're feeling in the photo when it's frozen in time like that. So again, you're trying to time for things when it shows the most in the photo. You have to think about that, because what you see might not be what you time for in the photo, and you might have missed what really drew you into that scene when it comes to the timing. And then another thing you want to time for and look for is connection. Say you have multiple people. Obvious example is a couple. So say they're talking to each other, maybe they even have their arms kind of on each other's side, but if you just take a photo of that, it might be a nice scene, nice couple, but you want it to be a little bit more, have a little more connection. So time it for when they're in full embrace or kissing, or maybe they have some connection with their expression, or she has her hand on the back of his head, something like that. You could have two friends too, where they're, you know, play wrestling or hugging. You want to find the connection there. You could have two people talking, but if you don't catch them at the right time, you might not even really be able to tell they really have a connection when they're talking like that. If they're just standing there, you don't want that as much as you want them to have. You know, again, connection will likely include things like gesture and expression, but you want to make sure that you time for when that connection is really present in the scene there and is really, you know, really brought out. And there's other connections too. You could have connections not necessarily between people, but you could have connections between a person and a pet, or a person and even an object. But you want to make sure that when you click that shutter, that connection is coming together. It could even be juxtaposition when you have, you know, something on a sign that kind of connects with a person, but you want to make sure that that connection's at its, you know, again, peak. So time it for when that connection is most present or most close to the sign. You just really want that connection to be as strong as possible, because you could have a scene where there's two people, they have a connection, but you catch them at the moment where it's really not present in the frame when you click that shutter. Again, with couples, when they're not in full embrace anymore, or maybe they're not looking at each other at that moment in time, she glances away or he glances away, or two friends having a very expressive conversation between each other, lots of hand action and things like that, but you catch it at the moment when their hands are at their sides. Or you have a man and his dog, and they're running or they're playing catch, and you catch it right when he's throwing the ball to the dog, or you just catch it right after he threw it and his hand's at his side and the dog's just running off. Now there's no connection between them. So you want to look for that moment in time where that connection is at its most present state. Now, my last two tips on timing: get away from timing for specific things, but more about timing for placement in the whole scene. So you want, especially when you're dealing with layers, you want to time for the best placement to click that shutter so everything is in the best possible spot without control of the scene, of course. And there's ways you can do that with prediction and timing. Now, when I look at a scene, I'm trying to incorporate, you know, I'm looking for feeling and things like that, but I'm also trying to use kind of both sides of my brain. Now, before photography, math was always my best subject, and that's why I graduated in economics and I went into actuarial science. But I got away from that because I needed, photography was definitely my number one love once I found it, but I still kept that kind of mathematical, analytical side of my brain, and I do try to incorporate it into photography and street photography out there. I do think it can help. So while I'm out there, I am trying to feel things out, but at the same time, when it comes to, you know, a frame, I'm trying to predict certain things. So when I look at a scene of a lot of different things happening, I'll have a few subjects there that I think are interesting, but I want the whole composition to be balanced, nice layers, things like that. For scenes like that, I'm watching every moving element in the scene, every moving subject. So I could have a person here walking, a person here walking, a person here standing, but maybe they're throwing up a ball. So there's different things happening. So I'm looking at, how could this scene be perfect? How could I have the whole frame filled, very balanced? So someone's here, someone's here, someone's here, the person throwing the ball up, the ball's in midair. So I'm trying to predict, at what point is that possible where everything will be in the right spot? So I'm looking at this person walking, and I'm looking at what direction are they walking and how fast are they walking. I'm looking at this person walking, what direction are they walking, how fast, and this person, how often are they throwing the ball up? So I'm kind of analyzing that and timing it so everything is at the best spot. And sometimes I'll have to, you know, kind of move a little bit to get the right angle, but I can time as long as everyone keeps moving at the same speed and direction, which half the time doesn't happen. But if they are, I can kind of time for when everyone's in the right spot. So that's one thing to look for. Try to look at the whole scene out there, even outside the frame, and try to see where people are moving and kind of predict where they're going to be at certain points and predict where the best time is to click that shutter for the best photo, and where everything kind of works. Now, you have to find scenes that are going to be capable of doing that, but if you do, timing can make or break it. So if you get the timing right, it can turn into a really good photo. Now, my last tip for timing is not only timing for all the uncontrolled life out there, but also time yourself. Now, when you're out there, especially with street photography, you should be moving a lot, especially using a prime lens. You should be kind of moving and filling out the scene and moving with it for the best possible photo. But at the same time, you should be timing where you're moving with how they're moving. So especially if you have like a layered scene or a lot of people close up, you're gonna have to move a lot, because anybody that moves even a little bit is gonna completely change the frame there. So you wanna be moving too. So not only are you timing where they're gonna be, not only are you timing for expression, their expressions or their gestures or their actions, you're also timing where you're gonna be when everything comes together. So if I see something, people moving, and I see someone about to, have some gesture there, or maybe there's a fight breaking out, something like this. So you want to time for the moment where it's really obvious, like I've said, but you also want to time for where you're going to be when things are moving so fast. So if you have two people about to punch each other, you have to time for where you're going to be and they're going to be and where they're going to be at mid-punch like that. And also with your timing yourself, if you have things happening a little bit of ways ahead and you need to get there, you're going to be timing when you're going to be there at the right moment. So while you're timing for what's happening in the scene there, you're also timing for how long it's going to take you to get to the right spot to take the photo. So you're not only timing for the scene, you're timing for yourself, where you're going to be, what angle, at what moment. It's all about timing, because if you want to, you could just stand in one spot and just turn and take photos. But if you want the best possible photo, you're going to have to move in there and you're going to have to time for the best possible time and best position. So those are some of my tips on timing. Probably got a little complicated there with how I analyze scenes, but there's a lot you can time for, because you can take a photo where it looks like, even if you have all the same people and the same things happening, but if you have the wrong timing for the viewer, they might not even see. They might just see a bunch of people. But then if you have the timing right, you could have everything placed perfectly. You could have people mid-movement, great gesture, connection, expression, feeling. It could completely change the whole photo just by the time that you click the shutter and being able to predict that. But that brings me to the end of this photosynthesis on tips for timing. If you have any requests for photosynthesis where I can take any questions, ideas, topics, and I'll turn it into a video, let me know. DM me on Patreon or email me at 100majorcities@gmail.com, 100majorcities@gmail.com. But in the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video. Cheers.